Denny Zimmerman is living proof that all things are possible. Like many young guys, Denny got hooked on racing at the old and now defunct Riverside Park Speedway, but he did it back in its glory years. You see, back then the park ran on 2 nights, Saturday nights, and they ran Sportsman on Tuesday nights. In '58, Denny's racing career took a turn that would forever change Denny Zimmerman's life. Like a lot of racers, he crashed. But this wasn't just any run-of-the-mill old crash, because he rolled his Sportsman car, and as Tom Gallen said, and away he goes. Denny Zimmerman, as Ken Squire would say, extricated himself from his wounded machine and sought out the guy who he thought was really at fault. But instead of exchanging crescent wrenches, Zimmerman simply stated his case to the offending driver, and as kids today say, was given affirmation that it was indeed the fault of the other guy. The other guy has been inducted into this Hall of Fame as one of our inaugural inductees, the late, great Eddie Flemke Sr. From that meeting grew a friendship and a mentoring that took a young Denny Zimmerman from Riverside Park to Manassas, Virginia, to Old Bridge, New Jersey, to Daytona Beach, Florida, and yes, eventually, to a passion that we both share, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Flemke and Zimmerman, you see, comprised 2/3 of what were called the Eastern Bandits. Together with Rennie Charland, these bandits would run up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and more often than not would beat the hometown heroes and chuckle as they got the payoff, in cash, by the way, from the local promoter and took it back here to New England. Now, while Flemke and Charland eventually rose up, as you've heard recounted today, through the Sportsman ranks and the modified ranks, Zimmerman decided that he was going to take another road, the road less traveled. He captured the United Racing Club Sprint Car Rookie of the Year title in 1966. You see, much the same as Pete Zanardi said, that I was brought up with an abiding passion for open wheels. Well, Denny Zimmerman possessed the same dream. Now, for some, winning the URC title would have been sufficient. But it wasn't in the case of Denny Zimmerman. Next stop, USAC. Next stop, the Brickyard. Yeah, he was an overnight sensation at Indianapolis. Together with a band of Bay Staters that were led by a fellow named Jimmy Jorgensen. I remember in Illustrated Speedway News, the headline, Bay Staters tackle Indianapolis. Bulldog Stables is going to Indy. This was in 1969. Denny Zimmerman failed to make the race that year. But he returned to Glastonbury, Connecticut, having passed, and back then it was difficult, folks, what was known as the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Rookie Test. And if that didn't get the short hairs on the back of your neck standing, when you had grizzled old veterans telling you need to go deeper into that corner, son, that was the way it was done. In 1969, I was also treated to my first ever trip to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, a place where when I was growing up, the late great Sid Collins painted beautiful word pictures so that when I walked through with my dad, I said, yeah, I've been here before. Yeah, I remember that. Sid Collins told me about that. Freddie Agabation talked about that. It just was all there. And to think that there was a fellow nutmegger there trying to make the Indy 500 cemented for me a dream that I am thankful enough that I live to this day. In 1970, Zimmerman returned to the Brickyard, but this time it was with a car called the Navarro Engineering America number 50. You remember that one, Denny? A Fiore owned the car. No, not Mario. A fellow by the name of Frank. Guess what? They didn't make it again. No problem. 1971, third time the charm. Connecticut finally had a representative in the Indianapolis 500 field, and his name was Denny Zimmerman. Again, it was a Fiore car, the Frank J. Fiore Enterprises Special, a rear-engine Volstead Offie. This cat qualified on the inside of the 10th row, 28th, but with a shoestring budget and an iron will, he soldiered home to 8th position. The following night, they hold a banquet, and it is probably the most impressive awards banquet to this day that is held in motorsports. That night, Al Unser Sr. posed with the Borg Warner Trophy after winning his second consecutive Indy 500. But I will never forget reading in the Hartford Times the fact that Denny Zimmerman had also accepted the title of Indy 500 Rookie of the Year at that same banquet, and a check for $10,000. And if you listened, and you listened really carefully, you could hear the echoes of cheers all the way from Speedway, Indiana, right back here to New England. I know one guy smiled. His name, Eddie Flemke. You got to remember, Steady Eddie, any of us that knew him, seldom showed his emotions. But this time there was no hiding the pride that Flemke felt for this kid from Glastonbury. Just a year earlier, it was Pete Hamilton in Daytona. Now, another one of his protégés had accomplished what many of us only dreamed about. For a young kid like me, having been born and bred on the heritage and the history and the traditions of the Indianapolis 500, Denny Zimmerman's Indy 500 accomplishment was a milestone that is to this day forever embedded in my memory. His perseverance taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me what my father tried for so many years to convince me of, and I thought, yeah, right, what do you know? You're an old fart. If you are prepared to sacrifice, if you want something bad enough, you can get it. Dreams do come true. Oh, yeah. Denny returned to Indy one more time in '72. Lo and behold, he qualified 28th again. Once again, he was poised to score a top 10 finish, and then the Offie in his Coyote car expired, and the Bryant heating and cooling car completed but 116 laps. To this day, if you're ever fortunate enough to go to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, there is a Hall of Fame and museum between the short chutes of turns 1 and 2. Go through the tunnel and walk into the antechamber, and there is a sign there that lists every single driver that has ever competed in the fastest field of 33, what is known as the biggest, greatest spectacle in racing, the Indianapolis 500. Go there and you will see Denny Zimmerman's name penned there twice. Then walk inside and walk past the Marmon Wasp, and you think about Ray Haroon. Go all the way down to the end, and once again, Denny Zimmerman's name is there on the list of Indy 500 Rookies of the Year. I lost track of Denny Zimmerman a long time before I eventually made it to Indy in a working capacity. But I give you my word, on that day in 1984 when I stood in Victory Lane and I interviewed Rick Mears on the occasion of his second Indy 500 triumph, I thought only about two people. My dad, who taught me about the traditions and the history and the importance of the Indianapolis 500, and Denny Zimmerman, who made it all come to life for me as a youngster. Denny took that $10,000 that he won for Rookie of the Year and could very well have been the best Secretary of the Treasury the United States could have ever had, because he compounded it and was able to enroll in flight training and flight school and go on to a second career as a jet pilot. And every once in a while, I would run across somebody that had been on a flight with Denny Zimmerman, and I would smile. And I would think about the Eastern Bandits, and I would think about 1969, and I would think about 1971 in the Indianapolis 500. There's a certain irony to everything today, because it wasn't until I had been asked by this august group to induct Denny Zimmerman into the Hall of Fame, then we bumped into each other. And I mean literally. Turns out we both now reside in Suffield, Connecticut, and like two old farts, we were at the drugstore looking for something to help us with our prostate. But when I bumped into him, I smiled. And when I walked away, that smile didn't go away for a long time, because it was the same sort of smile that I think Eddie Flemke smiled on the day that Dennis Zimmerman was crowned Rookie of the Year. It's the same smile that I hope will greet his induction today. A smile of pride, a smile of tribute, a smile of honor for one of New England's finest. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you for induction into the New England Antique Racers Hall of Fame, Mr. Dennis Zimmerman.
Oh, you got big print here.
I'm an old fart.
Well, I just wore my glasses. I'd like to thank the members of the selection committee and the other members of the Hall of Fame and the fans. And I'd like to thank Jack. That was a great introduction. It's been 27 years since I've been in a race car, and you still remember me. Wow. What an honor. I'll cherish this for the rest of my life, believe me. I'd like to use this opportunity to thank all of the people who helped me along the way, even the ones that helped me into the wall once in a while. Really, there were lots of folks that helped: car owners, mechanics, drivers who let me use their garage, folks who let me stay in their homes. Because I was so focused on racing, I never thought to thank them properly. So to all of you out there, wherever you are, thank you. As you probably know, and Jack stole some of my speech. As you probably know, the one person that helped me the most was Eddie Flemke. I always had confidence that I could do well, but I wasn't always sure how to go about it. Eddie helped to fill that void. And let me tell you how I met Eddie. I didn't walk over to him right after that because I went to the hospital. But it was my second year at Riverside Park. It was at the end of the backstretch, and Eddie came charging out of the infield. I ran over his right front with my left rear. Oops. I spent the night in the hospital, and incidentally, I was in a bed next to Ed Patno. He was in there for a hernia operation. We had a lot to talk about. Thanks again to Johnny Georgitis. That night, he picked up the pieces, towed my car home, and the next day, he rescued me out of the hospital. I considered that just a racing accident, but it turns out that it was really a gift. We became friends, and Eddie really helped me in the early stages of my career, and then after that, too. Eddie enjoyed helping folks, everybody. He helped them set up their cars and give them tips on driving that helped them go faster. I must have been a real challenge for him. When we first started going down south, the Eastern Bandits, it was easy pickings. Folks down there had lots of horsepower, and they'd zoom down the straightaway, but they'd park in the corner, and we blew their doors in. Enter Ed Flemke. True to form, within a year, he had helped them set up their cars, and now it was just as competitive down south as it was in the Northeast. Eddie helped me most, but there were many, many others that helped. And to all of those people, wherever they are, I say thank you. And I have to add here, to all of the different types of race cars that I drove, I have to say that modified stock cars were the funnest. Couple of stories. Rainey, you'll remember this, and Freddie Rosner will remember it. This happened at Norwood Arena. There was a racing writer or a newspaper man up there that wanted to go for a ride. I can see Rainey smiling now. It was in a heat race. The guy climbed into Rainey's car, and I don't remember whether you had a seatbelt in it or whether he just hung onto the roll bars. Yeah, he just hung onto the roll bars. That's what I figured. Anyway, Rainey started at the back of the pack, and we figured that he was just going to follow the pack around, and if it was easy to pass a car safely, he'd do it. Well, we all stood there with our mouths open, because when the green flag dropped, Rainey stood on the gas. And he went charging up through the pack. I don't believe he won it, but he was second or third. He drove just as hard as he would have with nobody in the car. When they got through, Rainey had the normal grin on his mouth, on his face. And the reporter also had a grin, but he was white as a sheet and his knees were shaking. I'm curious, is that reporter here today? Poor guy probably died of a heart attack at an early age. There was one other time. I have to admit that probably this guy picked the right driver to ride with, because Rainey, as long as I've known him, he can run hard, but for some reason he has the uncanny ability to stay out of trouble. So it was a safe ride for the guy. But there was one night that we all piled up, and Rainey was involved in it, and we dusted ourselves off and walked away from the cars, and there's water and fuel leaking out of the cars. Rainey couldn't find a cigar. We all thought he swallowed it. So did he. I just want to say that I'm honored to be included with this great group of racing people up here. And I want to thank the committee again, thank the previous winners, and thank you all for including me in it. Thank you very much.